You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. Your love changes everything. There's something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. 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 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. Oh, there's something about your love, something about your love changes everything in my body. Oh, something about your love, something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything, changes everything. Something about your love, something about your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing.
Good morning, Rooted Men. Pleasure to be with you on this Friday morning. Matt Ryan, Elder, Firmly Rooted Ministries. Getting used to this new stand-up desk. Things are a little different in the setup here, but we'll make it work. I know I haven't been with you in a number of weeks. It's been a pretty hectic start to the summer. I just spent some time in Cincinnati and then spent some time in New York, all saying final goodbyes to my sister's husband John, who unfortunately passed in May, and spent a lot of time with her and her daughter, and got to spend some time this last weekend doing a family reunion out on the lake. So it's been a very busy time of travel for the Ryans. So sorry to have missed you, but it was good to get away and spend some time with family too. So hoping that you're doing some of the same some point this summer. Summer always seems to be that season, right? These are the few months that a lot of us live in Michigan and tolerate the weather all year for how beautiful it is for these couple months. And hopefully you're getting some time to enjoy it. I know it's been wet and it's been a little funky, but anyway, I guess I always start there. I always start with that idea of gratitude about appreciating what we've got going on and what's going on around us. So hoping you're in that same kind of mindset on this Friday morning. Sorry, it seems like every time I move my head, this thing refocuses. So I hope that's not too distracting to you. But we're going to go ahead and jump in to the study here. So we're looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 through 9. And so where Tom left off yesterday, we're talking about these divisions in the church and this idea that divisions are created when we get focused on worldly things, right? Which is what we tend to do, right? And one of those things that's true about divisions in the church is that wherever they existed 2,000 years ago, when this was written, almost 2,000 years ago, they seem to exist more and more today. It seems like those divisions continue to grow over time. And what's interesting about what we're reading here today is that the blame for those divisions, why we end up divided, when Jesus came to unite us and create this one family under God, this one church united, why? And this is a question that plagues us today. Why would we have all these different denominations? Why would we be doing it all this different ways? And today's reading looks at that a little bit here. So, brothers and sisters, I could not address you as people who live by the Spirit, but as people who are still worldly, mere infants in Christ. I gave you milk, not solid food, for you were not ready for it. Indeed, you're still not ready. So Paul obviously talking about here, he planted this church in Corinth, right? And when you plant a church, virtually everybody's new to the ministry, and they're new to the word of the gospel and the truth, right? And so he is sharing the gospel for them, with them, as you would when you evangelize, in a very simple way, right? It's simplest terms. The promise of the resurrection, the promise of God's grace and covering you and atoning for your sin and connecting you with God in the way that has never been possible before, right? Just the very simple, basic ideas. In that same idea that a baby lives on milk, right? That's all a baby eats. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks in between, it's only milk because that's all their body can handle. They don't have teeth. They don't have a digestive system. It's a really simple analogy to look at what it's like to be a new Christian, right? And that idea of moving from milk to meat, right? As you grow, you need more nutrients than you can get just from milk. You need a balanced diet. You need all these different things in order to grow. Now, of course, many of us later in life, once we became an adult, we chose to not eat a balanced diet anymore. I won't mention things like broccoli and spinach because I know they turn some of your noses. So, but anyway, not necessarily talking about just nutrition, but this idea that you must grow. And in order to grow, you need different nutrients. You need a new way of doing things. And so Paul is obviously frustrated here because at this point, it's been 4 or 5 years since he planted the church, or 3 years, whatever I don't know the exact time, but somewhere in that range. And so we should have people who are growing by now. They shouldn't just be babies feeding on milk anymore. Just the simplified version isn't good enough. They need to be learning and digging in and applying the truths to their lives and applying it to their work and their relationships and all these different things. But here they are still not ready, still worldly. For since there's jealousy and quarreling among you, are you not worldly? Are you not acting like mere humans? Are you not looking to this world for your answers, for your issues, for your jealousy, for your needing to, what they're doing is factioning off and saying, I follow Apollos, I follow Paul, I follow this guy, for it's him that teaches me the word in the way that I like it. It's him. It's his charisma. I follow just my pastor, right? We still do this today, right? We go to church because of the pastor. So many of us are here because Tom is so great at speaking the word and making it relatable, at teaching and bringing it right to us in a way that impacts our lives, right? But are we here for Tom, or are we here because God is speaking through Tom and God is creating a new version of us by teaching us, by getting us rooted in his word, right? And so we've got to look past the worldly things. That's what Paul's frustration is here. What after all is Apollos and what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they will each be rewarded according to their own labor, for we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field, God's building. There's so much stuff in here that's it's really interesting stuff. So, we talk about the milk, but what's going on is there's kind of two parts here. First, in the negative sense, we need to leave our sin behind, right? We need to stop focusing on the world for answers, stop being worldly, stop being of the flesh, and move positively, move toward a focus on God, move toward spirituality. That's where maturity comes, right? As we're talking about that process of a baby and growing up into an adult, milk to meat, whatever it is, however you want to look at it, there's a process of transformation that we must undergo in order to become that new creation that we are in Christ, right? So now he's talking about spiritual people, right? He's talking to spiritual, kind of describes, right, those who have become a Christian, and that's the simplest way, in contrast to the natural man or the unbeliever who is without the Spirit. Spiritual people are how he's relating now, or speaking of Christians or followers, which, of course, in this case, are largely still living as infants. So, like I said, when people are not of the flesh, the first thing we must do is look at ourselves. Recognize where we're no different from a world of unbelievers, where we're living as though we're unspiritual, where we're not walking in each facet of our lives, where we haven't submitted to God's word, where we haven't applied it, what's a sacred cow that we've said, oh yeah, I get this stuff, and this spiritual stuff is one compartment in my brain, and how I live is another compartment, right? And that's where Paul's challenging us to break that down. And the best way there is to kind of overcome that sinful nature, right, to do that negative first step of walking away from our sin, is in confession, right? Now, confession in some churches, like the Catholic Church, is a common thing that you go to. And of course, there's a danger of it becoming rote and meaningless as well. But true confession, like the readings that we do on Sundays when we do a confessional reading, truly coming with a contrite heart, analyzing and thinking about the areas that I'm carrying, the areas that I'm trying to manage myself, the areas where I'm not trusting in the Spirit, but I'm looking to worldly answers. It's difficult, right? It's hard to discern what those areas are sometimes. It's hard to be honest about them sometimes. But I challenge you, because it's in that practice of confession that transformation can occur, right? It's a part of worship. I need it, right? We all need it. And it's something we don't naturally do. So it's got to be an intentional act, right? So we can really identify ways that we're following kind of our selfish and sinful desires, right? Where we're following sinful practices of the world around us in ways we don't notice because we're surrounded by it all the time. It becomes so normal. There's so much in this world that we're just inundated with input all the time about the way the world behaves. And we start to take some of those things on. That's where we've got to be careful. We've got to guard our heart and say, right, discerning it. Is this spiritually mature? Is this where I want to be? Right? Because at the end of the day, I'm presuming that you've stepped back at some point and said, I want to go there. Right? I see these people living in a spiritually mature way and I see the peace they live in. I strive for that. I'm working toward that. Okay. So here's some tools of how we can get there. Right? So Christian growth isn't about getting bigger, right? It's about becoming more like Christ, which requires that process of transformation. Here, God, I'm part of the division in this way. I'm part of saying this is the right way to act and this is the wrong way to act. And I've created a division whereby I judge people, right? How can I let go of that? That's what we're doing in confession, in a time of real confession, where we're bringing our sin to God and saying, I don't know why I hold on to this, Father. I don't know why I see it this way. I know that you've implanted a knowledge and a heart in me that wants to see things, and I hurt for things that aren't in line with what I believe you want. But take this from me. Help me to respond to it the way that you would. That's that kind of process that helps us really transform into more maturity, right? And there's an expectation that we're growing, that we're moving. Just like on a child, right? When you're raising a child, you're not going to let them stay on milk forever. You're going to do things that are good for them. You're going to push them outside of their comfort zone, right? In order to grow, because you know that there's more to life. There's better things out there than, just sitting on the couch playing video games or whatever it is that you're looking at the current time. So sometimes we need to look at ourselves and parent ourselves, right? I often talk about in financial counseling, if you were running a business called You Incorporated and you were the CFO, the chief financial officer for You Incorporated, and the budget you turned in every month was like you're running your life, would you have to fire you for the way that you're running it? Same idea here, right? Spiritually, are you taking up that yoke? Are you being responsible to push yourself now, kind of in that parenting role for yourself? Open yourself up, right? Obviously, God's going to do the work, right? There's a planter, there's a waterer, and God's going to do the work at the end of the day. So the second part, right? Not only must we walk away from our sin, but we also must then focus on God. I know I'm getting long on time already. Sorry, I don't know why I'm going today, but it is what it is. So we need to shift the focus on God through that transformation, right? As we're identifying things, it's again, like I've talked about before. Father, how should I react to this? Right? So if you pay attention to the verbiage, especially in the Greek, it's easier. When he talks about Apollos watered, Paul planted, whichever it is, I forget. I could look, but anyway, those are past tense verbs, right? Those are things that happened already in the past. But he writes, but God gave the growth, right? Gave is in that imperfect tense, meaning it's a past action, but it continues into the future, right? So God continues to work. When we share the work of God, right, we can't make it effective, but God can, because his work goes on, right? We're called to specific jobs, to be an instrument in whatever way it is, right? That's what we are, right? We all have a role. And it talks about you'll be rewarded for the results of your ministry. This was one that I really liked here. For your own labor, in your labor, you're fulfilling God's commission. Your reward is described as a prize, right? So it's described as a victor's crown in 2 Timothy. It's praise from God, bringing pleasure to God in 2 Corinthians, receiving glory, honor, and peace from God in Romans, being awarded righteousness by God. So there's no doubt that the prize for the labor, right, is much more than we deserve, which is typical, right? Every good thing that comes from God is more than what we deserve, because we deserve death. We're naturally born in sin, right? So we're each being accountable for our work. We're not in competition with one another. We're all working together in one machine, right? One task, even though we each have our own responsibilities. And in that way, we're pointing the whole world to God. We're glorifying God through each of those actions, because we're focused on doing our work, not praising each other for their work or being jealous of each other because their work seems more important than mine or whatever it is, right? Again, that's slipping right back into those unspiritual ways. But recognizing we are created as one community with one end purpose that takes many workers to do many different functions. Just an interesting way of thinking about it, right? Not only are we teaching for the same God, but we're also working on the same project together. Everyone has these different roles. So really kind of a neat way to look at it. Sometimes at work, right, we can get jealous when other people seem to get jobs that are more important than ours, or they get put in a certain position on a project that we think we could do better, right? Same kind of thing can happen in our faith walk. We can look around the church and say, oh, I wish I was that. I wish I was relied on that way. I wish I was left alone, whatever it is, right? Um, but recognize as you're moving toward this focus on God, as you grow and become more mature, you will be given responsibilities from God. You will be given certain things you're required to do, and it's up to you to do them, right? There's this old saying that says, pray like it all depends on God, but work like it all depends on you. Same idea. Accept your responsibility as part of the machine. Accept that you do have a role and go to work. Do it. Be diligent. Be intentional about your parts of the responsibility. So this process of kind of transforming, letting go of this old me that was self-centered, that was selfish, right? All these things, that was looking to worldly answers, that was jealous, whatever it is. I'm now moving forward. I'm now growing because I recognize that's what I'm called to do. And because I trust in my good Father that there is goodness on the other side of it. Even though it may be challenging, I'm going to step in because I know He created me for a purpose. He's given me a role where I work in this church body, this global church body, not just the little one I belong to in my town, but the whole world as God sees it. We are all His children seeking to be unified under the blood of Christ. So I guess I'll stop there because I know I ran very long. But I hope this hits on something for you. I hope especially that idea of true confession is something maybe you can take on and start to help identify some areas. And this is one of those areas where we should be supporting each other, man. We should be walking each other home by helping to identify these areas in each other. Now, that's not saying we should go picking on each other and telling each other what to do and, oh, you're doing it this way, you're wrong, you're here, you're there, whatever it is. But we should be continuing to build these relationships of trust with each other where we can go to each other and be a mirror and say, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? Kind of like we tend to do on Thursday nights when we challenge each other and we talk about different ways that we're seeing the world, right? That's why the community part is so important. So I encourage you to continue building relationships, but be intentional about starting these conversations, right? Hey, what things are you struggling with? Here's something I'm struggling with. What things do you see in me, right? I did that when I don't know, a few years ago. I made it a point to take several different people out to lunch and ask them what they perceived of me, how they saw me in these different situations. And it was really eye-opening to see how different people see me than how I see myself. Anyway, some challenges for you. I hope that this leaves you in a place where you are feeling challenged and it causes you to take some action because we are required to grow. We are expected to grow. And some of that is on us to take our responsibility seriously and to push into some of these things. So I love you, man. I hope that's a good word for you today. I'm going to wrap up quickly by saying, let's make it a firmly rooted day. May someone see Jesus in us today. Peace.